Hello, Soda. Nice to see you again. I popping in really early to the stream today. Hopefully, you'll be able to stick around for the full duration. You made a revelation about Ram, you think? I'm eager to hear it. So, to everyone else, welcome to another episode of Fear the Old Lore, where we've been examining the lore of Bloodborne in ridiculous amounts of detail. We've been looking at the various item descriptions and note descriptions throughout the game, examining the game's mechanics and and the various architectures that we can find throughout the game to get a more informed understanding of what is going on. And within that process, we've also been examining much of the Japanese text and comparing it to the English version of the game to see if there are any discrepancies which might um, lead to more revelations as to the story and the lore of Bloodborne. So yesterday we did go back to Bergenworth after examining what the different levels of insight can reveal to the player. After defeating Ram, we went through Yahar'gul, we talked to Eileen, and got completely murdered by the Bloody Crow Canehurst with his insane levels of damage. So he is still active, and we might deal with him later today in this stream. I'm not completely sure if we'll get to it. Um, our goal for now is to go through the Upper Cathedral ward and perhaps the beginning portions of the Nightmare of Mensis. Maybe getting up to Mikolash, depending on how the timing goes. So Soda says, Ram in the boss room of Ebrietus could be the Ram that concealed the pale blood sky during the night of Old Yarnum's burning. That's an interesting thought. I don't have a whole lot of theories pertaining to that version of Ram. Um, it might have had a larger story in the earlier parts of development. It's pretty much bordering on cut content as it is in the game. Lance has said that there was supposed to be a cutscene from when we would use the queenly flesh at that altar in the altar of despair to restore her to life, but it's does leave a lot to be desired. And I did finish off yesterday pointing out that Ariana's stomach is a little bit larger after defeating the One Reborn. I believe she is a little bit more pale. It's really hard to tell, especially with her head sticking down. She's pretty unresponsive. So for now, we're gonna go head on up, since we got the key from the kind of locked away choir member that we can find within the Yahar'gul cell. And using that key, we can ascend to the top of the Healing Church workshop and go to the Upper Cathedral ward. I did point out before the first time we came through here that this is pretty easily identified as the Healing Church workshop just because they have so many hunter weapons strewn from the ceilings. It is still unclear why there's so many chained up coffins everywhere we go in Yarnum, but even the workshop isn't spared. So the enemies now are trivial compared to before, defeating the brick trolls in 2 swings. And I had read this note before in the earlier stream where we went through the abandoned workshop, but I would like to re-examine it again, just to kind of reacquaint ourselves with some aspects pertaining to the choir. It says the sky and the cosmos are one, and it has been penned by the choir. So they do call themselves the choir. And the interesting implication of the sky and cosmos are one is more apparent in the DLC when we can use the uh, the the research hall to gain access to the astral clock tower, and then from that clock tower we can step out into a kind of other aspect of the nightmare, which is completely unobvious in the sky, and reach a different layer of the nightmare. So with the idea of the sky and cosmos being one, that could lead into just how stepping out into what should be the sky of the astral clock tower in the hunter's nightmare, we access a different level of that nightmare. And it's very unclear in Japanese. There is, like, the character that they use for sky does literally mean sky. It is also tied to a lot of Buddhist ideas, or Buddhist and Taoist ideas of the void, or like emptiness and formlessness. I don't necessarily think that's what that note is implying. Like, the Korean also has that, like, their word for sky instead of like void and emptiness, so it's most likely read as sky. But in general, the idea of the universe itself being contained by emptiness, or form only being able to exist because of formlessness, does have like a lot of very deep ties to Enlightenment and Buddhism in general. Accessing the upper cathedral ward, we can see a very different kind of enemy than what we've encountered before. It does resemble some of like the feudal experiments that we see in the lecture hall in Bergenworth, and it also resembles the statues that we can find throughout the Forbidden Woods and lining the streets of Yahar'gul. These are called celestial larvae, and they are a kin-type enemy, and they're very likely related to Ebrietas, and that'll be a little bit more revealed as we progress through this area. They can be hostile, and they can inflict frenzy with their very kind of pathetic like bite attacks. And I do believe they can also spit like a little bit of blood, which can frenzy the player as well. Attacking them, they do bleed a kind of silvery gray blood, which is consistent with kin-type enemies. Rubido didn't notice the little root wing things they had on their backs before. Yeah, that is something that you can see on them, and I didn't show it off, and I suppose this would be a good reminder to tell me to go back and look at the backs of an amygdala later. But they also seem to have like kind of proto-wing appendages that don't really seem obvious at a quick glance, especially if you're facing them head on. So coming up to the Cathedral Ward, we've got some more church servants. No matter what level of insight we have, the guys with the lanterns will still have their arcane attacks and eyes on top of them. So that might have just been like a little bit of a developer error in handling the enemy types. Because if we do go back down to like the Cathedral Ward, even after the Red Moon's been revealed, there still will be the church servants whose lanterns are affected by the level of insight. And then we get some more of the celestial larvae, and they all do seem to be pointing towards the same direction, towards the Astral Clock Tower or the Grand Cathedral behind it as well. Cool man, welcome back. You're sure the light pouring out of that area is supposed to mirror the Mensis brain? Perhaps it has to do with the blood moon? Oh, okay. So, yeah, Herbert had just mentioned the light coming out of here. It does resemble like what we will find in the Nightmare of Mensis when we activate the kind of frenzy-inflicting brain. It does have the very similar orange glow. Of course, this doesn't go away if we hide behind things or come out of its line of sight, but I do think that is a very apt comparison to draw the parallel between what is going on in that location and with what we will uncover with the Mensis brain later on. If you remember correctly, they're called Celestial Child. You think the larvae might be the fan name? That might be right. I think it kind of works either way. but I do appreciate the additional clarity, because I do like to try to stick to the official names if they make sense, and I do try to avoid fan canon when I can. Oh, and before going too much further into the Upper Cathedral Ward area, we've got many statues that have been covered with these types of cloth. If we try to like look inside them, we can't really see a whole lot, unfortunately. We can try to sit down to not get in the way. It looks like there's something deformed going on with these statues. Perhaps they're related to what we can see going on in the statues of Yargul. We can see like a kind of skeletal ribcage going on, and possibly a somewhat messenger-like face. Some of these statues will be clutching staffs, like right here, and they do seem to have a kind of alien-esque appearance on like the little figures themselves. I personally like to associate these kind of statues with the Hamlet priest in the fishing hamlet. I think that might be what they're trying to convey. These were in the base version of the game though, and that did come out before the DLC, before that kind of story was finalized, so I really do wonder like how much that idea was thought out before the inclusion of the DLC in the final patches of the game. So it says the statues look like the female beast patients. Yes, they look like those guys as well. Rubito says they're called moon larvae, and the files and the spreadsheet uses celestial larvae to identify them. Not sure if they're called celestial children elsewhere though. I think they might be called that, like in the book. I do think the internal files might like use the kanji ko for like child. So I think the names are fairly interchangeable for these enemies specifically. Herbert says they're gelatinous and flabby looking. Reminds you of how Cthulhu was described. Yeah, I do think there are a lot of like parallels with the idea of like Cthulhu and old ones from like Lovecraftian mythology, if we can even really call it mythology, or cosmology perhaps might be a better word. We get another one of the arcs which we can find like in the Cathedral Ward itself. So the architecture is fairly consistent between the Cathedral Ward and the Upper Cathedral Ward. A lot of the iconography is different in relation to the statues though, and of course we've got coffins, because why wouldn't we have coffins in anywhere in Bloodborne really? Ascending the steps, we see a giant gate with iron bars locking it. This will be a shortcut which we cannot access, which is I'm sure a terrible surprise to everyone with FromSoft level design. And then if we actually wait a while to have all of the celestial larvae or children congregate over here, they kind of have like a praying pose like this one over here, and they will all be facing this general direction, either between like the Lumenflower Gardens, the Astral Clock Tower, or the Grand Cathedral, which we will discover Abriatus being at the bottom of it. I think these guys are pointed more towards the cathedral itself, which does lend into the idea that they're being attracted to Abriatus, and it is unclear if they are like directly related to her, or if the experiments that were being run in this area caused women to have these children, potentially like from using something which they received from Abriatus or something in connection to her. Possibly things like phantasms, the pearl slugs, which are supposed to be linked to Abriatus, or as some people might like to argue and postulate, like the blood of Abriatus herself. I do not buy into that reading, but I think it's important to just include for the sake of being consistent and presenting like as many plausible interpretations as we can. And I will talk more about that as well. Thank you for that, Rubito. Yeah, it's just like infants or like young, like newborn kind of is what that kanji is. We got another lake rune. We've examined enough of those already. I'm not going to worry about it. This is like potentially one of the child-sized coffins that Redgrave argues only appears in the Upper Cathedral Ward. I've shown off in different streams already that we can find them right next to the Erden Chapel, and that they are not only located in this area specifically. This is one of my favorite areas. I do like the kind of ambient soundtrack that they've got going on in the background. It's very, I don't want to say creepy, but it certainly does lend to that kind of the feel of like a mystery or something kind of almost sinister or ominous is going on within this area. Soda says, it seems the key being on an obscure mummified corpse in Yahar'gul is indicative of how secret the Kyre is or wants to be. I think that's a fair reading. Barros, Igari, welcome back to the stream. Nice to see you again. You say that that claim makes me fucking nuts. They show up all over Central Yarnum too. Yes, exactly. Just Redgrave being wrong. Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think he also presents that as like the truth. Like he doesn't distinguish, like that's kind of just his interpretation, and that he hasn't gone back over it over the years to just kind of like clarify or revise it is a little bit unfortunate, because a lot of people even to this day still read the Pale Blood Hunt as like the non-canon version of the game, you know? So we get some more Frenzied Cold Blood, which just shows that like this place is progressively more difficult than some of the other areas. It's always unclear whether or not like there's a lore significance to that or just more of a gameplay one. And then we get crows as well, not terribly important. We can look back out over the Cathedral Ward to just look at some of the architecture, see how things line up. I don't think there's like a whole lot to focus on in that area, although that does remind me, I believe it is from this angle down here. If we look back at the Grand Cathedral, or not the Grand, well yeah, it is the Grand Cathedral, isn't it? I'm trying to remember exactly. Okay, so I think we need to go a little bit further on this section of the bridge. So if we do look towards like the Grand Cathedral, and those are like the steps leading up to it, there is a kind of door that is not present in the final version of the game. Like if you go down to the Grand Cathedral, you'll see the door over there. That should, well, in earlier versions of the game there was going to be like an elevator. Okay, there it is. That's the door. There was going to be an elevator that led up to the Lumenflower Gardens, which are like right over there. And the path from the Grand Cathedral, like where you go down towards like Yahar'gul, wasn't connected. You can see that kind of break in the area. So you would have had to, at some point, like travel through the Grand Cathedral, and then sometime come up to the Lumenflower Garden, and then you could access Yahar'gul through that door. It's pretty unclear like how that all fit together. I know some people have more elaborate theories on that. I just kind of take it as a point of interest and move on, but I do think that's a pretty interesting like environmental detail to show off. And if we want to like try to rationalize it in the terms of this game, well maybe, you know, the hunter is just still not seeing reality properly, although that's kind of a little bit of a cop-out, I think. Rubito asks, do you think there's anything to be said about the choir's base of operations only being accessible through Erden Chapel? Something to do with Erden's connection to sound, music, maybe? Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, just because like the architecture in FromSoft games very rarely make a whole lot of sense to begin with. But I do agree, like there's the potential that since Erden exists through sound, and there's the possibility that the etymology of Erden could come from like Odeon, which is related to like sound and choirs and things like that. That is supposed to potentially be more of a thematic tie, especially since like Ariana's blood chimes and Erden interacts with her to create one of those celestial larvae infants that we've seen throughout this area. So I do think you can say there probably is a tie. or they intended there to be ties. Ooh, thought he got me. Alright. So yeah, these guys have a little bit more health than I was expecting, and their scythes are always on fire, no matter your level of insight, just like the lantern folk from earlier. Soda says he wouldn't mind the pale blood hunt if it wasn't treated as gospel, and Redgrave made it a point to completely separate fact from fiction. I think it also has to do with height and space. The astral clock tower looks over all of Yharnam. Yeah, and the astral clock tower will like kind of track runes on it, at least in the Hunter's Nightmare variant of it. They could be wanting to be closer to the cosmos, but by being high in the sky too, certainly, and that will become as we examine like some of the choir set descriptions and things like that. Herbert says Redgrave attempted to separate fact from fiction. He advertises it as doing so, but he just didn't do a very good job. Yeah, I do wish it was just a little bit more consistent with that. When we come inside the orphanage, as we will later learn that it's called, we can find a brain sucker, and he's standing right next to part of a choir set, if I remember correctly. And this will set up that like the choir is very associated with the kin, amongst other things. And of course, we get that grayish, silvery blood from the kin type enemy. Even just a visceral attack will show that off. So we get our first part of the choir set, the uniform for the faction of the Healing Church that kind of organizes and controls this area. Oh. And of course I would go the wrong way. So the choir garb is attire of the choir, high-ranking members of the Healing Church. Members of the choir are both the highest-ranking clerics of the Healing Church and scholars who continue the work that began at Byrgenwerth. Together with the left-behind Great One, they look to the skies in search of astral signs that may lead them to the rediscovery of true greatness. So this does like directly tie in the idea of an abandoned Great One and research done on the behalf of the choir, and they also believe that their method of conducting the research is in line with the original thoughts of Byrgenwerth and things like that. And I take that in conjunction with like the Augur of Ebrietas and the Pearl Slugs and the Kin Coldblood, when they all mention that they are tied to what the Eldritch Truth, which I would say is the arcane discovered in Byrgenwerth long ago, that what Byrgenwerth came into contact to was related to what we can find in Eyes and Ebrietas, which is pretty explicit. So the initial encounter marked the start of an inquiry into the cosmos from within the old labyrinth and led to the establishment of the choir. And it's the remnant of the Eldritch Truth encountered at Byrgenwerth. So I think just that idea that Byrgenwerth first encountered this and the choir continued to follow up with that research. I believe that's what they're really going for. And then the final line in Japanese, rather than them saying like that may lead them to the rediscovery of true greatness, it just says certainly that is the path to receive transcendental thought or like ascended levels of thought. So just some minor differences, but I do think like I don't know, it is significant when we consider like many of the characters' goals in this game is to transcend humanity. And that idea of transcendental thought plays into that their beliefs with ascension in general. Soda says, by blocking off their eyes, do you think the choir is trying to achieve the third eye? Maybe. It's really hard to say because we will find out, like in the DLC, there is quite a bit of superstition that the characters of Yharnam or like the Healing Church do believe. Like they believe certain metals will ward away beasts. They also believe that like fear separates beast from man, which isn't true when we look at the Molotov cocktails and things like that. So Rubido asks, is that a vermin, larvae, and the kin cold blood? I do think it's a bit subjective. For a while I did think like it could be maybe not like a vermin but like a proto-phantasm. And if we it's it's hard to say. It could just be the lighting. But if we do compare that idea to the kind of imagery that we get within the Madman's knowledge, of like the white thing resembling that of a phantasm or a slug, that could be a representative of like what might be in this kin cold blood. And it could be like the more densely packed with echoes something it becomes closer in nature to the nightmares, and the more that the line gets blurred between the nightmares and reality, it might allow for phantasms to kind of bridge that gap and begin to manifest themselves into the waking world. Of course, that is very much conjecture. I don't have much to like really support that. That just kind of makes sense to me based on like subtextual clues. Feel free to disbelieve that at your own discretion. Coming down to this hall, we get some darkness, so if I didn't have the lantern on, it'd be a little hard to see, and an item, and probably like the best jump scare in the game. Like once you search this body and try to walk away, this blue-eyed scourge beast will pop in through the window and attack the player. And they have like a lot of health. They're really hard to deal with. The idea that these scourge beasts have blue eyes is, I personally take it as evidence that these may have been like former choir members or potentially experiments by the choir, just like with all the brain suckers, to numb the mind using like the blue elixirs, either in attempts to create celestial emissaries or a kind of great one that they can use to try and commune with Ebrietas herself. Barrow says a little curved thing in the middle, maybe it's potential for life, like a little embryo. Yeah, that's a nice idea too, which I hadn't thought of, so thank you for bringing that up. Soda says, I think beasts can feel fear, but I think fearlessness and crass bravery can definitely contribute to the turn of people into beasts. Ludwig? Sure, yeah, for sure. You think Barros is onto something? It relates to how Annalise wants blood to create a child of blood, in your opinion, and blood is the source of all life. Yeah, there's a very connected theme with all of that. So, through this door, which is closed and we cannot open, we can make out the figure of a brain sucker behind it. Normally, you'd have to like go around and deal with, I believe, 3 of them, depending on how you progress through it. You can also just cheese the hell out of it by hitting it with a long weapon like the cane. And if I don't knock him away, I can just continue to hit it. And since right now I'm not using the thrust version of the attacks, is extremely durable and hard to kill. And interestingly enough, like when you kill him through this door, you get the automatic looting of the corpse of the orphanage key. They may have just wanted it so like if it dropped the key on its body and you got killed by the other brain sucker, it didn't like permanently lock you out of the item. So this, I will read this in a second. It does grant us access to like the front of the orphanage and not necessarily the gate that locked us out. The orphanage key is obviously the key to the orphanage, the birthplace of the choir. The orphanage, shadowed by the grand cathedral, was a place of scholarship and experimentation where young orphans became potent, unseen thinkers for the healing church. The choir that would later split the healing church was a creation of the orphanage. So this does set up a lot of background information between like the choir and the school of Mensis. When it says it split the healing church, it doesn't mean like the healing church ceased to be or anything. It just means like it was divided into between the choir and the Mensis, or the school of Mensis, as the upper ranking like echelons of the church. It is also interesting to point out that the choir was a creation from the orphanage, and they became unseen thinkers for the healing church. The idea of it being like unseen is I believe, let me double check the Japanese really quickly. Yeah, the Japanese just says they're secret minds, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're invisible or formless like some people might assume it to be related to like Murgo or Erden. So just want to clarify that. And right, I thought I was going to say something else, but I can't quite remember it, so I'm just going to look back at the chat. So if you just have enough blood, you can create a person for sure. I don't know if it would be a person. I do think there is a connection with like the phantasms, which might be like a more a type of organism that's derived from the nightmares themselves as opposed to like the waking world. And so I think like Erden might be one of those kind of things, but it's really hard to talk about and just kind of all theory craft right there. The Hierophant's Eye. What's a Hierophant? It's one of like the tarot cards. I believe it's related to like the idea of like a church leader of some sort, or a faith leader, or just maybe like a king in general. I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure Rubito would know more about that than I would. When we first open this door, we will have a decent amount of lighting in this area, but if we look closely, we've got some Scourge Beasts hanging out and about on top of the chandelier. We've got 2 of them. And when we progress down the steps, they will jump off, the chandelier will fall, and the room will be plunged into darkness. And then they will all become aggressive and run at the player. I don't really feel like dealing with 3 Scourge Beasts at once, so I'm just going to kind of cheese it again. And in this area, like, the sound gets a bit muffled because, like, the way that the camera works is it is related to, like, the sound comes from like where the camera is and not like the room your character is necessarily in. So it's trying to like listen to the sound from like behind this wall is what I think goes on. And so like one of my favorite jokes about like my skill at Dark Souls is I could beat any enemy as long as there's only one of them. Don't bring up the Billy Crow right now, please. And so that's why I just kind of cheese this, because dealing with multiple enemies is just more of a hassle than I really want to deal with. So that takes care of these 3 blue-eyed Scourge Beasts. They can also occasionally drop chunks, so this is a good area to farm if you're lacking them later on. Going across the little platform is another door which does not open from the side. And then we get like the child-sized coffins, which can be affiliated with the orphanage and things like that. And some more of the clothed, or I don't know, covered statues in this area. It is also a bit fascinating that like it doesn't seem to be additional fabric put onto them. It almost seems like a property of the sculptures themselves. I do like when you look inside them, it looks like the little bubbling features on them could be related to eyes, maybe in relation to like the Gardens of Eyes or something like that as well. So looking back at the chat, Rubito says a Hierophant is a type of priest that interprets sacred mysteries and esoteric knowledge. Thank you. Use some of the Dark Soul 2 simps. Is this part of the chandelier? It just looks like a broken piece of like a railing or something. When we go inside the choir itself, or the orphanage, we get this really large hallway. And oh, we get Ritual Blood 5. That's fantastic. I thought we could only get that from the Chalice dungeons. It's a little bit unfortunate that I don't have like the full progression to show off right now, but worst case scenario, I'll just like load up a different save and maybe show that off. Or I think no, I have to clear the chalices to get them in the shops. So that unlocks the shortcut back into the orphanage. Just opening it now in case for some reason I get completely owned by these brain suckers that are going to be kind of hiding out. So we've got brain suckers not out like patrolling the hallways, roaming the hallways. It's a little bit hard to attribute their sense of like a duty or purpose to their actions. They seem somewhat mindless until like they become aggressive. I like their like little wet kind of paddling footsteps. And then the thrust damage is certainly the way to go if you don't have a blood tinge. They drop the Quicksilver bullets, and then we get our Cosmic Eye Watcher badge. The Cosmic Eye Watcher badge is a badge of a member of the choir, elites of the Healing Church. The eye signifies the very cosmos. The choir stumbled upon an epiphany, very suddenly and quite by accident. Here we stand, feet planted in the earth, but might the cosmos be very near us, only just above our heads? So that little line right there does help me believe that rather than the note from earlier saying the sky and the cosmos are one, being a representation of void instead, or formlessness, the fact that they talk about the sky above is to be like the sky as well. Let me double check the Japanese. I don't think there's too much different. Right, it's pretty much exactly the same. So going back to the whole idea of like the eye representing the cosmos itself, in Bloodborne, like insight is representative of like cosmic enlightenment, and we can gain insight from like cold blood, and as it, or not cold blood, but like the blood dregs and the madman's knowledges, and when they summon like the One Reborn and things related to the nightmare, it does begin to take on like a more cosmic appearance. Like there's kind of like a mini galaxy going on between like the black and white and things like that, and that does seem to be represented in the middle of that eye there. And of course, like the arcane attacks as well, all very resemble the kind of theme that's been recurring through these types of items. Soda says, you think it's interesting how a lot of the choir members we meet are long dead. I agree. Rubito says the Bloodborne subreddit has probably ruined the statement, but the Upper Cathedral Ward is one of the best done atmospheres for an area across all the FromSoft games, in your opinion. I agree, this is my favorite area. I love like the stringed instruments to really like set off that eerie vibe that it's got going on. And there's just so much mystery like surrounding this area in general. Like in this case, even though like I really do want more information about the game, I feel like less is more. Like I feel like if there was more information given to us about the choir, or if there was like an NPC that just told us everything that was going on, it certainly would like spoil a lot of the mood that this place sets up. Like just the fact that you can see like the little scourge beast through the fog of this area, hidden in the darkness, it's just top tier for me. Some more twins. So it says the only ones we meet, they're obligated to fight. One thing you like about Bloodborne 10 times more than the Dark Souls is how we'll never truly solve it. I almost feel the opposite way. I feel like, at least with my understanding of the game, from what we can understand based on like what we're given from the game, we can become like pretty sure about quite a lot of it. Whereas I feel like a lot of Dark Souls is a lot more up in the air. And I'm pretty sure like Rubito disagrees with me on that point, but oh yeah, Wandering Madness, and I think, yep, there's the Bloodsucker or Brainsucker. Oh, holy crap! I did not expect like that kind of physical damage from it. Stupid Wandering Madness. I don't even need it, that's the funny thing. But in terms of understanding motivations and what happened in the timeline, a lot of it is super mysterious. Oh, you think it's less obscure than people present it. There's certainly like a lot of obscurity and a lot of things that are left unclear, but I feel like the overall mechanics, the overall story, and like the story arc is presented a bit more concretely than some of the other entries into like the FromSoft games. I was trying to sneak past them. I probably could have just gone down that hallway, but I knew I heard the footsteps. Is it really just one? Nope, there's the other one as well. And these Scourge Beasts do drop blue elixirs on occasion, which I'm really glad they did, because quite frankly I forgot about that. Which does support my idea that they have been experimented on using them, because, oh shit, blue eyes are extremely rare in like the types of enemies that FromSoft uses. Oh no, not my visceral. Damn it. So I lost 51,000 echoes. I'm not too upset. Like, we're at the point in the game where if things go bad, we could always like go through the Nightmare of Mensis and unlock the pig farming route and just get like, I think 60,000 in a minute or something like that. So looking at chat, Rebito says, I'm sure that Bloodborne fits together like Dark Souls does to you as well. People probably wouldn't be deep into it otherwise. It's just a matter of getting yourself into it as well. Herbert thinks with Dark Souls it lends itself to a wider range of interpretations, so there are more potential answers to be satisfied by. And Soda says Bloodborne fits together really well. There's just simply parts we'll never be able to solve. But you agree with that? Only Dark Souls 1 was more concrete theory-wise. So this time I'm just going to try to like sprint past and ignore everything. I don't think they'll be able to fit through that door, but maybe they will. Give us some chunks. So yeah, that brain sucker is chilling for us in the corner. It's very easy to get your insight stolen by that guy. And then I think there's another one at the end of this hall. Yeah. Some more blue elixirs just on the corpses here of humans, which may have supposed to have been choir members. And then we gain the blindfold cap, which kind of reinforces that idea that these humans were part of the choir. And then the others give us like the madman knowledges. And pearl slugs, which ties into what I was saying earlier with the choir continuing what was found in Bergenworth and the pearl slugs being related to Ebrietus as well. Just like the idea behind the abandoned Great One. I don't think the blindfold cap says anything too different from the armor. I did forget to like double check if there was anything else. Okay, yeah, that's right. So the eye covering indicates their debt to the teachings of Master Willem, even though their paths diverged. I believe the Japanese is pretty much exactly the same. The blindfold of the hat is proof of their direct descent from Headmaster Willem, even if their ways of thought differ now. Yeah, so pretty much exactly the same, semantically. And if any of you are wondering like where I'm pulling these translations from, I've got a link to my spreadsheets in my bio or the description if this is on YouTube, so you can examine those for yourself. もしかしたら日本語わかったらぜひ私の間違うことを直してください. So yeah, if you do know Japanese and if like I've made a mistake somewhere, like please let me know. I'm completely fine with that. It's pretty easy to make mistakes, overlook things. So this is probably like one of the coolest parts of the game in my opinion. We open these huge doors to just find a mummified corpse standing, looking at like the astral clock tower. The moon's on the right. When we come up to it, it says talk, and from it we gain the make contact gesture, and then there's nothing else beyond that. So it's very interesting that it says talk instead of inspect, like you'd normally find on just like the other corpses throughout the areas of the game. So the idea that we can talk to it to make contact is going to be a bit more relevant later when we encounter the brain of Mensis, but it is just something I like to point out. It is like an interesting environmental detail. And just to go back to the chat, with Bloodborne it's more difficult to read without a literal mind. I'm not sure, maybe. It feels when you need to become a space slug to truly understand the lore. So answers are usually going to be restricted to that. Moon runes are building your frenzy meter. Protag speaking Japanese is building my frenzy meter. Oh. My fault. Like, I phrased that terribly, like I couldn't think of the word to like, say like, to like leave a comment or revise. I can't even think of what I'm trying to say in English, let alone Japanese. It's pretty bad. Oh yeah, okay, so I have mentioned these statues before in relation to like what we can find on the door of the Grand Cathedral, and we saw them somewhere else. I can't remember where off the top of my head. I do think that these could be related to the umbilical cords, because when you get close to them, like, they've got these circular features on them which do resemble eyes. Maybe like this might have been like why the eye collectors related to Hemwick were interested in eyes. Just the idea of third umbilical cords being aligned with eyes and things of that nature. And of course, like, they don't look like traditional types of eyes, but if we compared them to like what we found on the model of Ram, they might align a bit more closely. So we will find these statues appear in the research hall as well in the DLC, except they'll have like a green kind of flame instead. And then there's going to be a blueberry that foreshadows what's going to come from behind it. And before we go into the boss arena, just makes your head shudder uncontrollably. What are you studying in linguistics? Well, I've studied Japanese, English, and Korean. My Korean is really, really bad at this point. Like, if I have a dictionary and time, I could figure things out. I just haven't used it in years, so it's hard to talk about it. Like, I can still read it okay, I just have really forgotten a lot of things. This is the Lumenflower Gardens, and when we come in here, there are some very, very interesting statues. They resemble what we can find within the Nightmare Frontier, like the thing that's in front of the Amygdala's resting chamber. Looks like the top of that like little gate, and if we look down, we see it has like a kind of body and multiple skulls coming out of the front. One moment, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Sorry for that little delay. So, I do believe this statue is supposed to represent the moon presence. If I remember correctly, there is an unused model for the moon presence loaded into the Lumenflower garden area. So it may have been supposed to have been encountered at some point in development. Although it's really hard to say whether that ideation of the moon presence is supposed to still be like the final boss of that time. It does also match like some of the concept art for the moon presence, specifically with the skulls on it. There's a picture in the art book that has like a bunch of messengers crawling over the moon presence's body. So, just want to bring that up. And there's a bunch of incense urns up here, which does explain like why the scourge beasts aren't coming into this area. And then we've got the Lumenflower garden below, where we will encounter the next boss. It's filled with lumen flowers, and I have mentioned this before. In Japanese, Lumenflower is pretty much the same kanji as sunflower, but instead of like the kanji for sun, they use star instead. So I think calling it a starflower would be a good idea. I believe they chose to go with Lumenflower to represent the idea that they're luminous, and there is also a play on words in English where like lumen is related to like blood in the veins and like blood vessels. I don't remember exactly how that works out, but just like the idea that it could be that it's luminous and like connected to the arcane, and lumen related to blood, I think does work very well in English, even if it is just a little bit unclear or doesn't represent like starflowers. Some of my headcanon is that the flowers here are supposed to be like cold blood flowers. So this is the Celestial Emissary boss. The trophy description does confirm that it's a great one. And they kind of spawn out of the ground, which is a bit hard to explain. And then once you do enough damage to it, it will become a gigantic guy. I should have unlocked completely. Oh, that was bad. I was expecting the one swipe, not like the multiple combo attack. It's pretty embarrassing for me to die to these guys, like death by a LMAO. Yeah, pretty much. Herb says you think Lance said that it's not true that it's info from JSF, the moon presence being loaded here. You know what? I do not remember where I heard that. I thought I heard it from Lance as well. I'll probably have to ask him off stream or something like that. But yeah, Lance is a really cool guy. He is very accommodating with sharing the information that he's found. Like obviously he can't share like everything, but I've talked to him offline a bit and gotten some pretty cool cut content information, things like that. So talking about the Celestial Emissary in general, like it is confirmed to be a great one, which it's a little bit unfortunate. Like it doesn't seem like a full great one just because of how trivial they all seem, but I suppose like that ties into like what I've said before, where like perhaps the great ones really aren't that great, you know? You can visceral the like boss one and do a ton of damage. It's a little bit annoying to do at times. And he will stay kind of passive and avoid the player until it transforms. And then in the later portions of the fight, he will spawn these tendrils on its head and do more arcane attacks. I don't really feel like dying again, so I'm not going to try to show that off. If you're super curious, you can look at like videos on YouTube, which is kind of a terrible thing to say, I suppose. Or we can like look at what the enemies did in the Forbidden Woods, when we encountered them, they did have like those kind of arcane attacks. When we come to like the DLC equivalent of this area, all of these flowers will be open, and you'll find like the research hall patients being able to use similar kinds of arcane attacks, but which does lend into the theory that if the research hall is like related to the orphanage, perhaps like the blobheads are related to the process of trying to discover how to create celestial emissaries. And so, with these being like a Great One type of enemy, perhaps it's only the large variant which is considered the Great One. The small ones might be. We don't get confirmation one way or another. It does interest me how they pop out of the ground. They do seem to be related to the flowers, and when we go to the research hall, we'll find like a lot of the bloated head patients tending the flowers, which kind of does increase the ideas that they are connected. I guess these ones really have like real models, and they don't disappear after the boss. It's interesting. I don't think I really like paid attention to that before. One thing that I will show off really quickly before like going into the next area and reading chat is on the choir garb. If you kind of like zoom in onto the belt, let me try to get a good angle. I know how to do it in Hunter's Dream really easily, but I guess maybe the camera is just higher or something. It's really hard to see, but like coming off the very front of the uniform, there's like this little thing protruding above the chains by the waist. That looks to be like a little flower bud, and I think it could be related to the cold blood flower bud, which lends into my theory that this area with the cold blood, or with the Lumenflowers, there are just cold blood flowers by a different name. And if we get the higher levels, I do think the icon resembles these plants a bit more strongly. I know Herbert did have the idea that the reason why they're closed now is because of the moon being out, and with the red moon being out, it gives like a kind of harsh light, and so if it's just like full on night, they will bloom, if I remember correctly. Or maybe I had that backwards. He's here, he should be able to explain it better than I can, because it is his original idea, and I want to give him credit for that. Soda says, it seems like the celestial emissaries are crafted en masse in hopes one would ascend to a Great One, to be honest. Maybe the fact that they pop out of the ground is different than pretty much every other kind of enemy that we find rather. They that is a kind of unique mechanic as far as like enemies go. I mean, that is shared with like the living failures, which in Japanese are called like failed creations. So it does seem like the Healing Church has been trying to create Great Ones for a very long time, and the celestial emissaries are a more perfect version of that dream, but maybe not completely. Lance is fantastic. Greatness probably isn't much to do with physical prowess. Maybe, but I think even there's like some questions we can ask about their mental prowess as well. If ebrietus comes from like inebriation and Ram is vacuous, like that doesn't seem to be indicative of great mental prowess either. But to be fair, like the whole idea of enlightenment, like being indistinguishable from madness at times, is very relevant to those kind of claims, I think. You assume that was the point. The Great Ones are weak physically, they just know the eldritch truth, so to speak. Ram is a good example of the irony of being a Great One. She's ascended but is mentally disabled and lives in an endless lake and is used as a pawn to conceal the Mensis ritual. Something about them closing so they don't absorb the evil corrupting influence of the red moon. Okay, so yeah, he might be AFK, which is fine. I know like this is a really bad time zone difference between us. And so we did get the communion room from the large celestial emissary, which to me it just shows like the connection between like the blood and things like that, and it's something that we find repeatedly related to the Healing Church specifically. We get one in the workshop before coming in here. We get one from the Celestial Emissaries. I think there's one in like the lecture hall, which could like be related to Bergenworth and the idea of the Healing Church descending from Bergenworth. There's, I think, like a level 5 in the chalices, if it's not like a hack chalice. I don't know if that's like for real, but I don't think it's in the story chalices. It might just be in the root ones. And there's another communion rune, and I don't remember where it is off the top of my head. Could be stupidity blocks out madness, like an ignorance is bliss type of thing, maybe. It is like often like compared like the knowledge of a fool to the knowledge of a wise man, and that just does get repeated. And so we have another celestial infant pointing into the Grand Cathedral, which we can see it is the same structure as before, and it is a indicator of like Ebrietas being in there further. And I should go on the other side to get the very, very special item later on. So we get a Call Beyond, and this will tie into that idea of like slugs being related to the cosmos, or slugs or phantasms more specifically. When you look at the icon, it seems to have like a cosmic image in the middle of it. I do believe these kind of resemble the appearances of the celestial centipedes with the fluorescent flowers, the big so-called vagina monster with teeth that we can find in Bergenworth. Very terrifying indeed. Like the head does kind of match up with the shape. It's just kind of like lacking the flower. But just like slugs or invertebrates in general, mollusks is the term they use in Japanese. They are all connected with like the arcane and can do crazy cosmic attacks. So this is one of the secret rites of the choir. Long ago, the Healing Church used phantasms to reach a lofty plane of darkness, but failed to make contact with the outer reaches of the cosmos. The rite failed to achieve its intended purpose, but instead created a small exploding star, now a powerful part of the choir's arsenal. At times, failure is the mother of invention. I do think that the Japanese for that was straightforward. It's important to note that that lofty plane of darkness may have been the nightmares, and from the nightmare they may have tried to go like beyond it, but they failed to do so, maybe because there really is nothing beyond it, and they just kind of have a flawed understanding of their own universe. We don't really know for sure. It's just some conjecture that I'd like to bring forth. And so this became a tool of the choir. We will find like Mikolash using this as well. And there, even though like people will say that maybe there might have been a conflict between Mensis and the choir, like it's really hard to kind of substantiate those claims other than just the one corpse that we find in the cell in Yahar'gul. So it'll be right back. Okay. And then we get 2 more blueberries, and this guy right here will use those arcane attacks. He resembles the large celestial emissary in its final form, which is like, if it's such a badass to begin with, like why didn't it immediately go into its Super Saiyan form? So it's a little bit of a kind of a pushover as far as like a boss fight goes. You can fight them in the chalices as well, but they won't spawn their little minions, and you can just delete them with close range attacks. Like the minions make it more of a boss fight than like the boss itself. And I suppose there is a little bit of a parallel between like that celestial emissary boss fight and Rom and her boss fight with her little minions. I don't think it's too important though, but it's just something I thought of. So there's a summon for an old 100 bell Damien of Mensis, which is part of why people think, oh well, Mensis must hate the choir if we can summon him against Rom and Ebrietas. But like I've said before, I don't place like a ton of significance onto it, and I admit that's a little bit unfair perhaps, but do it. Barrow says the corpses isn't even really imprisoned. Yeah, that's true. Like he could get it, well, it could have gotten out at any time if it wanted to. And And so we come into potentially the Healing Church's dark secret. We come into contact with Ebrietas, the abandoned or left behind Great One. It will remain docile until it is attacked, and it seems to be either praying or weeping towards the statuesque image of what looks like it could be Ram the vacuous spider, or a different kind of spider that very, very, very strongly resembles Ram. And because this statue has very long legs, that's why people assume like Ram should have had long legs. It could be maybe only like the body portion of it grows and the legs really stay the same size, because Ram has tiny legs about this size. It's really hard to say. This is called the Altar of Despair. In Japanese, it's closer to the Altar of Grief. I tend to believe that this is not a statue of a Ramlet. I believe that it is probably a corpse of one, just because surrounding it we get this kind of tomb mold, and tomb mold only grows on like corpses and things long left abandoned. And we also get these flowers which do resemble what we can find in the Hunter's Dream. So to examine Ebrietas, she's got these long tendril-like wings, tentacles for arms, somewhat like what an amygdala might have in terms of like the number of limbs. She also has like this long kind of protrusion coming out of the back of her, which I think can resemble the weird kind of half-transformed statues we find coming out of like Bergenworth and the lecture hall. Or they might not be in the lecture hall, but I think they're also in the fishing hamlet. She's got like these two forked tails, possibly legs, and it may be possible that Ebrietas was a human at some point. I don't think she has a belly button, if I remember correctly, but like her form is somewhat humanoid, despite very obviously not being humanoid. I do think, like what I mentioned before with the connections between the eye rune coming from the voice of Ebrietas and being found in Willem, I think like these little fungal type features coming out of her head is also what we might see coming out of Willem as well, which supports my idea that maybe, hey, Willem did go into the chalices with his students and came into contact with the so-called Eldritch Truth, or more accurately, like the arcane power of Ebrietas' voice through the eye rune. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. If it did, great. I think we'll start the boss fight now. And this could go very badly, or it could go not so badly. I'll try to use like the beast blood pellets and like maybe cheese her. You can kind of like stick between like her tails or legs or feet, and it's harder for her to like track onto you, but it doesn't always work and you can fall out. It'll be a little bit unfortunate if I cheese her. It'll also be pretty unfortunate if I die a lot. So just in the sake of like being like using our time wisely, I'm gonna try to attack her now. The first couple hits won't do damage until she gains aggro. Oh, holy crap, that was a one-shot? Oh, it's because my beast hood is up. So now, unfortunately, she will be aggressive when I return to the arena. Yeah, I got riggedy wrecked. You use tomb mold to open the eye chalices, among other ones, so that might be a significant somehow. That's a good point. I didn't remember if we use tomb mold for the other stuff, but when we do go into the eye chalices, they're certainly like covered with tomb mold or some kind of fungally related stuff. I do think there is a connection between the tomb mold and like that ideation of the cosmos that's on display down there. So, thank you for bringing that up. Probably would not have thought about that. And of course, Ebrietas is also a great one. Some people say she's not fully ascended. I don't think we have enough evidence to definitively make those kind of claims that she and Ram aren't full great ones or fully ascended great ones. Like, if they are not great ones, then what really are? victim of the wonky tendril. Victim of my own hubris, really. Talking about trying to cheese her and like failing spectacularly. Maybe it's because I'm locked on and I shouldn't be locked on. Oh no. So you have 2 lock-on points for her. One like on her head and another on her body. She does not really seem to have full-on eyes on her head. So I should have done enough damage to Visceral her, but I guess I just got stuck behind her for once. And I missed that opportunity. So she can spit this kind of blood at us, which will do frenzy status effect damage. And what is going on with this camera? That might be enough to frenzy me at this point. Oh shit, I didn't look at my HP. So I should use the sedatives, which I don't have equipped. Oh, and I forgot to grab my echoes as well. So I'll probably do her like maybe 2 or 3 more attempts, and if I continue to fail, I'll just go into the Nightmare of Mensis and progress with the story. Because she is technically like an optional boss, but there is a bit more that we can do in relation to Alfred's quest and Annalise after defeating her. I do like how from the back she almost looks like a dragon that you'd expect in like Dark Souls. I mean, she's very obviously not a dragon, but looks like she's getting revenge for that amygdala beatdown. So yeah, I'll give this as my last try. You honestly found Ebriatus a bit harder than the DLC bosses. Yeah, I had a lot of issues with her like defiled version, just because she can one-shot. So each boss that I ever like really summoned for, just because I already beat the base one and I didn't want to just do a recycled fight all over again, so that's like the only time I've summoned for like a boss on Bloodborne. Yeah, Ebriatus is really cool. She also has like that arcane effect that she'll use in her second phase, which I haven't even gotten to for some reason. Oh god. Oh, and I got stuck on her body. Okay. That's enough humiliation for now, I suppose. I'm certainly out of practice with this fight. And I don't really like to like take up a lot of time just like grinding on one bit of the content. I feel like it can slow things down quite a bit. So off to the Nightmare of Mensis we go. Doll's asleep. And then, yeah, it should be... let's put on my Frenzy Resist gear, so that should be like all of Jura's set. And we don't have Eileen's mask to increase that level of the Frenzy Resistance. You two generally think that Ebrieta sees the Rom corpse as a sort of reminder of her abandonment? No? There really isn't much we can say about it, unfortunately. It's just all kind of guesswork. I think if we go into the idea that if Ebrietas was caused at one point in development and Rom was granted eyes by Kos, that could have been like the connection between them, but we don't really get that in the final version of the game. So we get that kind of ambient effect going on of the whispering and this brain that's going in the background can frenzy us if we stay out in the open for too long. Okay. So I don't know if you guys noticed it, but the one... Okay, you just did it again. The one Lauren Silverbeast did shoot out like maggots from its mouth to come and attack us. And so that does show that they are infected by like a kind of parasitic being. And of course, in the Nightmare of Mensis, we've got the consistent, like, bubbling skeletal rock formations, which I think could be related to the dead Yarnamites in Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village. I really do not feel like dealing with all of this right now, so I will be a little bit cheap and run through this area until we kill the Brain of Mensis. Because, I mean, why not? And then in this area there will be a bunch of Yetis, or the lost giant children. And they will be hurling boulders at us as we make our way through the area. So we got a Tecmo Super Bowl, our run. And then we come to a side section of the chapel of like Murgo's loft and all that. And the silver beasts you may have seen is like claws elongate. So I will try to kill it with the fire just to show that when you do kill them with fire, the maggots inside them will not pop out of them. And then this is an arachnophobic's favorite room in the game. We get it filled with a bunch of gigantic spiders. None of them have heads, and they do resemble exactly what we will find with Patches later, or in the lecture hall. So coming into this room, they will drop down, begin to attack us if we go in a little bit further. And there are some hanging from these ceilings as well. You can shoot them down, or not. And if we were playing online, we would have a Bell Maiden who's ringing a sinister bell in this area that we can kill. So it's very easy to get invaded here. Hardly anybody does it because they don't like to deal with the brain, but it's something you can do. So we got some kin cold blood off of a corpse that is very, very not slug-like, which I've brought up time and time again, like that the cold blood does not define what like the type of organism that it came from. It just shows like its level of power in the game. Barros loves to invade here. It's one of your favorite scenes. The spiders are such an oh shit moment. The pyromancy is interesting. Oh yeah, because they like breathe like the fire with their torches. The Lore and Silver Beasts. Like I said before in the other stream that it could just be like it shows like their breath is so rank and defiled and so old that it's become toxic and like flammable. And from this corpse we gain 6 Shaman Bone Blades, which is interesting because they're not a very common item. You can use them to have an enemy attack its compatriots. There's that little lunge that I don't really try to do, screwing me up again. And so now that we got rid of those like numerous spiders, I think the big one will still be... Oh, yep. I wasn't expecting it to come down. So I don't know how deadly it is over here. I wonder if the idea was like maybe if you got the Shaman Bone Blade here, you could use it to, holy crap, have it kill the little spiderlings. Okay, I probably deserve that. For getting it stuck like that. So yeah, I don't know if maybe they wanted us to use the Shaman Bone Blades on like the big spider or maybe like one of the little spiders to kill everything. But it probably would be funny. For some reason, like once you loot that corpse with the Shaman Bone Blades, you can purchase them from the shop. I don't really know the rationale behind that. And as we go throughout like this area with the brain, we can see like the corpses here do have the frenzy spears popping out of them as well. So yeah, if I normally try to deal with the big spider and by cheesing everything, I'll just run out this door and use my whip because it's on a higher level, so it can't reach as effectively. Oh, I was not expecting the Silver Beast. Alright, screw all that. I'll just unlock the shortcut first. And hopefully get my foot out of my mouth. I think the fact that the spiders are headless might be relevant when we come face to face with some of the enemies later on in the area. We will find crows and dogs who have their heads switched from their bodies. So crogs and dows, as some people like to call them. Dogs with crow heads and crows with dog heads. It's all madness in this nightmare. I think that idea in general could be could like set up that the brain of Mensis may have been like taken off of a body, or they might have been trying to figure out a way to put the brain of Mensis onto a body later on, because they are interested in like swapping heads on bodies. And of course, like Patches' head is on the spider's body. We will find Nightmare Apostles, which are pretty much the exact same as Patches later on. This guy is called Edgar the Choir Intelligenceer, and his name comes from the guidebook. Oh crap, I meant to go down the steps. This is bad. And his name comes from the guidebook, so I'm not entirely sure like how true canon that is. I kind of dislike that he's called like the Choir Intelligenceer or like the Choir Spy, but there's nothing I can really do about it. Just have to accept it, roll with the punches. So if he is a spy of the choir and he's already in the Nightmare of Mensis and attacks the player, like that is a bit of a strange thing for him to do if he wants to stop Mensis or actively work against Mensis, because it seems like our goals should align in that regard. So that's part of the reason why I don't like the idea of an all-out faction war is as much as like a scholarly dispute. So Edgar does wield the Ludwig's Holy Blade. He's got on a student uniform, and I don't remember which gun he has. I think it's Ludwig's Holy Rifle as well. No, he has... Is this the Rosemarinus? Or is it the Flame Sprayer? Either way, we've got a kind of like knockoff Harry Potter look going on with him. And that's about it. As far as he goes, like he's just another NPC hunter. So he drops the blood jug because I have the rune equipped. I should have switched out for the vermin one. I suppose it's not that big of a deal. So what's the guidebook source? We don't know. Like allegedly they should have had like some contact with From Software to gain access to the information that they had. So it could have been internal notes from the From Software development team. When we look at the internal files, like his name isn't really indicative of anything. It's just like a hunter of some sort. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's really nothing that says like spy, I don't think. So we get the yellow backbone, and I was gonna show it off in the room with all the spiders. Maybe I just shouldn't, because it appears elsewhere. It's not that big a deal. Nope. They all still get aggro, I guess. They can hit pretty hard too, surprisingly. It would have been kind of cool if they like did poison damage. I mean, it would have been super annoying too, but just, I don't know, like the idea of spider venom and spider toxins goes hand in hand in a lot of folklore. So hopefully I don't get killed while I'm not paying too much attention. If we look start like in this area when we finally get indoors in the Nightmare of Mensis, we can see a whole bunch of well, at first glance may look to be like egg sacs all over the walls, but when you come closer, it's more readily apparent that these are eyeballs. Maybe not so much in this area, like you can't see the retina so well. You kind of can on like the bottom left one. So this entire area is like kind of lined with eyes that have been strung up onto the walls with like spider webs and things like that, which is very different. Like, how the hell are just eyes not attached to anything, just hanging out about on the walls? I think there is going to be a relation between like that idea and Murgo and coming into contact with great ones, potentially granting eyes to things. And then these eyes seem to have spider-like legs as well, and they have like this really weird like fur, almost arrow-like shaft coming out of their pupils. And so the question is like, did they see something, and are these like their kind of frenzy spears, or were these shot by something else? I almost think it's like a frenzy spear, because when we do come into contact with the brain of Mensis, the frenzy spears shoot out of us. And so these little somewhat docile guys are called Murgo's attendants. They've got like these iron masks and like weird sets of armor on them. They seem to be more Thumerian and less church affiliated, because this type of armor is more medieval than like the Victorian kind of things we're used to seeing in Yharnam. And they're not very aggressive until you start to attack them, and then they become a bit more coordinated, but they're kind of slow. And they don't have like dialogue, they just kind of grunt. But they've also got like the purplish skin, which makes them appear undead and things like that. So Burrow says no, it's just invasion NPC of Trap Road, and of course like Trap Road is what they call the Nightmare Frontier, and Trap Road just means like obstacle course in Japanese. So this place is a bit of an obstacle course, I guess, even though it's nothing like Sen's Fortress, which I think was also called Trap Road in the Dark Souls internal files. Some more beast blood pellets, which is an interesting location for them. And then we've got like the mirrors that we can see in Yahar'gul appear again here, and they're still covered in eyes. They're cracked, but they don't reflect anything. So some people do like to think like the mirrors are related to granting the School of Mensis access into the nightmare. There's a good possibility that like the location that we're in right now was originally crafted by the Thumerians, just because like the attendants are more like they're more like pygmies almost. Like they don't seem like fully developed people, which is a little bit terrible thing to say. And we don't really get these anywhere else. Like they don't show up in the chalices either. So even though they're called like Murgo's attendants, like there's really nothing connecting them to any place else, including Thumru. It's just something many people think that this entire structure is a Thumerian relic because it may have been in the nightmare before the School of Mensis. It's also possible like this might have been thought up by the School of Mensis. Like it's lined with books, and it seems to be like their kind of night world or nightmare base of operations. So him wearing student uniform seems to be symbolic of him being a spy. He probably impersonated a student, to be quite honest. They're not the same as spiders as Roms, which is interesting. Yeah. Bloodborne doesn't depict industrialized society, so it can't be Victorian. Well, bad news for you. I mean, Yamagiwa and Miyazaki have all said it's Victorian and Gothic in its design elements, so get wrecked. Like that's what the developers call it. I don't get too bent out of shape about that, but if it really concerns you, like it's not quite Gothic either, so you either go with like what the common people are using, or you just live a life of misery. And I'm one to talk because I do tend to care about semantics. So these big ones are called like Murgo's chief attendants, and they're much larger. They carry these like chain-like whips, which might have been used on the Yetis that we see outside, and then they've got like the giant like butcher knife type weapons as well. And bafflingly enough, we've got books caged up in these like little pods. Maybe it's forbidden knowledge, and they're covered with eyes. JSF thought at one point like some of the half-transformed skeletons we find in Yahar'gul were supposed to be in these, and they were supposed to be enemies. I haven't found any indication of that. I believe Lance said he hasn't found any indication of that, so I don't know where JSF sources came from, but I'm inclined to disbelieve them. And then there's like this giant gap or chasm off to both sides that we will be able to access later through like one of the little cage pods. And we could get ambushed by some of the little attendants, and other ones will be wielding crossbows later. That did not work out. Don't really feel like getting shot at by its friends or aggroing the big one. So trying to play a little bit safer. So getting hit by their arrows does do rapid poison damage buildup, which is something that is related to Queen Yarnum herself. or perhaps Thumerians in general. I thought I was going to miss that. And they all kind of have like this kind of jester-esque looking like face. I think there's like a depiction of a woman on their armor as well, like the chief ones. I don't quite remember, and it might be kind of related to like what we find off like the butcher type enemies, the ones with like the black hooded cloaks. So it could also be like the chief ones might be like the Thumerian equivalent to like the brick troll type enemies. I guess it's too covered in blood and like the ragdoll's too bad to fully get a good picture of. And so these cages right here, like these, this like little glowing dial is actually that of an eye. It's a little bit hard to tell until you see like the non-illuminated equivalents on the cages. So I think the cages are further on beyond. Yeah, okay. So I'll just catch up on chat before progressing. Oh, we got a Krog. Or is this a drow? I don't know. So we got a crow with the dog's head, or a dog with a crow's body. Either way you want to slice it. Mirrors, lamps, chairs. Mensis was making psychomantiums. I don't really know what those are. Could you elaborate for me? So it would help if they didn't promote it as a Victorian setting. Yeah, it's Gothic for sure. Me is wrong. In your opinion, it's just that Yharnam is way removed from industrial European society. That's fair. But flintlocks and blunderbusses are too primitive for Victorian society. And there's no industry to speak of. Well, technically, like Yharnam is set to be like off, isolated, and probably like more of like a rural type setting for this kind of world. Like, and so it might be a little bit behind as far as the technology goes of the world at large. It's a bit hard to say. Yeah, still waiting on the citation needed for that. What kind of guns were around in the 1890s? Well, they definitely did have like flintlock pistols, and even progressing onto that, I think that's when like it's a little bit before like the time of like the Colt revolver with the 1911. But to be fair, I'm not like a gun aficionado, and I'm sure like someone will be able to correct me for being wrong about that. Your opinion, Bloodborne is depicting Western European society mid-1750s with some light Gothic influence and a touch of Victorianism. Not the kind of guns Bloodborne depicts. It's two bats, you think. Also, oh, on their armor. Also, the Victorian era was really colorful, so it can't really be like Yharnam. Well, hey man, it's night. Maybe like during the day it does become brighter. That is only a bit like half tongue-in-cheek, because when we do get like the Yharnam sunrise, like the whole area really does brighten up. So, and of course the crow dogs are still loud as crap, and then we finally get a dog with a crow's head, or a crow with a dog body, which might be related to the spiders. So the other one should come down too. It's taking forever. Coming. There we go. I think this one you just like run out. I don't think. Oh, it's got a Krog in it. Yeah, okay. Probably just needed a roll, and the run was a bit excessive. So we get a blood gem from that body, and as I had pointed out before, we can more clearly see like the figure of an eye on the like little dial on the inside. I think it very, very strongly resembles the eye pendant, which we'll use for the skull of, or not the skull of Lawrence, but like the depiction of Lawrence in the Hunter's Nightmare. And then we get some more Krogs. Some more Kin Coldblood on humanoid bodies, bloodstone chunks. Maybe I should go back to the Hunter's Dream and like try to level up before dealing with Mikolash. Can be a bit annoying to die. And then now that we're in the nightmare of Mensis and like climbing the tower, the cries of the baby Murgo become much more distinct and much clearer. This right here is like a little elevator platform which will get brought up to the top of the arena once we defeat Mikolash. And going into his arena we have these skeletal figures that are animated by like wisps of smoke as though they are puppets. Interestingly enough, when we do get hit by them and try to rally our HP, we gain nothing back. Oh, that's pretty hilarious, really. I'm trying to show off a simple mechanic and just dying. A Psychomantium in this arrangement of chairs, lamps, and mirrors you sit in so that you can see your own dim reflection in every direction. It's like a divination thing, you think? Interesting. I haven't heard of that before, so thank you for bringing that up. I will try to look at that in my free time. Guns in Bloodborne are single shots modeled after arquebuses, flintlocks, and blunderbusses, all of which would become absolute by the Victorian age, or obsolete, you mean? And the fashion isn't Victorian at all. Like Tricor and hats and the big trench coats are pretty dated in terms of Victorian fashion. Like I said, man, they're out in the boonies. They don't know any better. What about the foreign set? That seems like it could be real Victorian fashion, right? Actually, yes. It's a bit more modern, which indicates that Yharnam is a bit of a shithole and kind of backwards. Alright, I'll try to show it off once more without dying. Just trying not to get like chain comboed. Alright, so yeah, we don't get that distinctive like aura coming back from us from hitting them, which is very, very strange because it's something which is consistent throughout the game except for like on certain enemies like those. So I don't really know why we can't regain our will to fight from hitting them, but I also think these ones respawn, if not just the ones in the arena with Mikolash. You wonder why that is? Yeah, it is really weird. You would expect it to be more consistently handled.
Ah, cause. Or some say cosm. Do you hear our prayers? No, we shall not abandon the dream. No one can catch us. No one can stop us now.
So that's probably one of the most iconic lines in the game, like cause or some say cosm. People will quote that all the time. It's kind of a meme. Mikolash is the leader of the school of Mensis. He is quite verifiably insane. You chase him around this like kind of little arena and try to get him to go into that room on the left. I think the intended strat from the developers was to like chase him in the big circle and then like cut him off from the side so he always runs like away from where you're facing. That doesn't always work out. So I'll try to show it off and he might run into the room or it just might break. And we ignore like the little ads because their tracking is kind of bad. And they will respawn and they don't really interact with the boss beyond that. So okay, this part is a bit more effective. And then he will begin to fight us directly. And he uses Augur Ebriatus right there, which like summons the tentacles of Ebriatus. And they can like one-shot hunters pretty easily. and then he will occasionally try to hit us with his fists. Oh, that was not so smooth. Nor was that. I do have questions about like the little things that will fall off of the Augur of Ebrietas if like it does land a clean hit. I think like those are their own separate kind of phantasms is what it's trying to show off, and it's probably not literally from the body of Ebrietas because they will still appear even if you kill the Great One, which is kind of funny to think about. Like, how can you summon parts of Ebrietas if she's dead? I mean, she's also a Great One, so maybe they don't fully die, or the fact that we can find her in the chalices later might be relevant. So we get a pseudo kill of him, and he just disappears, and then we have to go up and chase him in a different area.
Oh, majestic! A hunter is a hunter, even in a dream. But alas, not too fast. The nightmare swirls and churns, unending.
So there is a bit of a difference between that dialogue in the Japanese version. Instead of just saying like the night swirls and churls unending, he says like the nightmare is swirling and churning into something which can probably never be ended. So it's just saying like the nightmare itself is probably eternal.
As you once did for the vacuous Rome. Grant us eyes. Grant us eyes.
And so he's beseeching Kos to grant them eyes very clearly with that set of dialogue. I do want to compare everything he says to the Japanese, just to kind of talk about that, but it's a little bit distracting in the middle of this fight, so I'll try to come and revisit everything after the fact. He jumps into this mirror, which is why I have been bringing up mirrors before, and he teleports away. And so that's why like a lot of people believe that there's importance to mirrors in relation to the way that the School of Mensis was granted access into this area.
As you once did for the vacuous Rome. Grant us eyes. Grant us eyes.
So he just kind of says the same thing over and over. He hops around a bit between things. It's an iron door key. It gives us access out of this arena once the fight's been cleared and towards the brain of Mensis. So there probably is like a proper sequence to get this fight going. Oh god. And this like part of the fight has always been like a little bit confusing. For me at least. I think after he hops into that, I don't think it's like now you can hop down and try to like ambush him, but it might be like hopping down does get him to move in a different pattern. Just going back up to the top by the big old mirror. So this can be like one of the most annoying fights in the game just because of how annoying it is to follow him and how often he'll like run away because it isn't completely scripted. And so like the first time it is pretty cool, it's really novel. But if you're running through this on like multiple like New Game Plus cycles,
for the
or if he kills you like in the final part of the boss fight, it just takes a very long time to set up and gets kind of old. So plunging attack is the most effective move in the entire game. The howling so campy, yeah. I think it's just supposed to like lend into the idea of like going mad and becoming a werewolf are kind of connected. It's a very campy fight, and his dialogue is very cheesy, but it works pretty well in this area. So he goes back in there. First. This will become relevant later, I know that. Okay, yeah, that's how it is. So you can cheese him by like throwing poison knives into that hole where he was located. And he'll kind of like teleport like back and forth in place. Now I think I need to go to the top. Yeah, probably. Yeah. So like once that gate drops behind him, that'll be like the final portion of the fight.
Ah, cause. Or some say cousin. As you were gone, I ran like of a man, hidden now from sight. The cosmos, of course. Let us sit about and speak feverishly, chatting into the wee hours of new ideas of the higher plane.
So one of the notes that I like to leave outside of his boss arena is like woeful howling, just because of how ridiculous that does become. If he uses a call beyond, it can probably one-shot me. So defeating him, we gain the Mensis cage, and then we get the cutscene of that one platform being raised up to the top of the boss arena. You know, no real explanation as to why immediately killing Mikolash causes that to happen. I'm just going to blame it on messengers pulling an unseen lever. Because what else other explanation do we have? And I really do love how the voice actor portrayed Mikolash's lines. I think it's done very, very well. There are some semantic differences in the Japanese, which I do think are very relevant in terms of like trying to understand his motivations and things like that. I will catch up with chat in just a second. There is the final line where he says, "I'm waking up now, I'll forget everything." The Japanese for that is phrased as a question. It might be a bit more rhetorical in what it's asking, but he's asking, "I'm waking up, will I forget everything?" Which I think has a very, very different kind of flavor in terms of how much it's supposed to show that like how much he knows about the nightmare or his current state of existence. Like it almost seems to imply that like in the English version, of course, like he still thinks like his physical body is alive and well. He doesn't realize he's a mummy, but it just shows that he is not quite as knowledgeable in Japanese as he is in English. And I will go over the rest of his dialogue in a moment as well. Scrolling back up, we have you wonder why that Yarnum is a bit of a shithole and kind of backwards. Perhaps because they aren't strictly alive. Oh, you're talking. Oh, yeah, it's the rally thing. Okay. So the puppets, not invigorating. Mikolash's voice acting is strangely really good in Italian. I have not listened to that dub. Boss, or some say bosom. Is that supposed to be a bosoms joke? Time is convoluted, etc. I don't really think time is convoluted so much in Dark Souls or in Bloodborne, but yeah, it's definitely convoluted in Dark Souls. So you don't think so? You think a lot of the choir members have the auger? Could just be a result of experimentation to mimic Ebrietus. Needs a more plunging attack. Plunging attack's most. Yep. The Howling so campy. Grand Lake of Mud is Ram's Lake potentially. I was going to talk about that in a moment. So Cosmos, of course, his scream is so funny. Oh, oh. It's terrifying to think he'll die and be a floating consciousness since his body is alive, or is dead. Well, he might not even have any more consciousness after tonight. We might have killed his last remaining dream consciousness, since he isn't a great one, and his form might not persist after death, like compared to Queen Yarnum, for instance. Rita says the Grand Lake of Mud makes you think more so the bottommost plane from which all others emerge, but I guess that isn't really verifiable in the final game, like where the old one is in Demon Souls. Yeah, I do think that is a potential like recurring motif amongst the FromSoft games, like in Dark Souls 3. They introduced that idea of the deep, and of course, I mean, like I'm gonna absolutely detest any ideas that like what we get in Bloodborne is like the Age of the Deep for Dark Souls. Like Miyazaki, Yamagiwa have said multiple times, like Bloodborne isn't supposed to be and was never considered to be a sequel to Dark Souls story or Demon Souls. So I just take it like references to the other games are nothing more than Easter eggs. So
What?
leveling up
Very well.
and accidentally
Let
gesturing.
the echoes become your strength.
And I haven't shown it off yet, but like the doll's
Let
clapping
me
because I
stand
gestured.
close.
She'll also like bow in greetings to us if we gesture to her. Sometimes something like one of the developers added, and it's just kind of an Easter egg. Like it didn't have like
Farewell,
a lore reason for it. Like Miyazaki just said like, oh he like stumbled across it like one day that someone on his team had put it in, and they just kind of went with it. I guess I'm pretty low on the vials after dying so many times. I should probably repair the weapon. I don't think I've done that for a long time. And look to see if Garen's here before talking about Mikolash. So Garen still is missing in action. Sometimes we can get like an extra bit of dialogue of him like begging for Willem to help him as well as Lawrence escape the dream. Alright, that should be good. And then going back to the nightmare to look at Mikolash's lines. So going back to his lines. So he says the nightmare churns and can probably never be ended. So like if the nightmares are an afterlife, they probably do churn, just like the difference of like the difference in like the echoes or souls of people being born or dying and returning to the area. If it is an afterlife, it probably won't be ended because it's kind of like an eternal realm. I'd like to mindless Ram grant us eyes, give our brains eyes, let us overcome the stupidity of beasts. Submerged in mud, the lake is no longer visible. The cosmos, what a mouthful. Like, it'll be dawn soon enough. Talking until dawn, new thoughts, transcending dimensions. Okay, yeah, so the idea that the Lake of Mud could be related to Ram is a very good reading, I think, of what we get in the final version of the game. In some of the cut content, the Blood Minister talks about the awakening of Ebrietis, and at that point in development, that was the name for the moon presence. And I think he talks about the mud in that context as well. I'd need to pull up that text. To confirm that. So let me try to pull that up in a second. And then the other takeaway is Mikolash thinks that even though they're in the nightmare, there's more transcendental dimensions that they can explore. I think that ties into the idea behind the a call beyond phantasm that we can use. They reached a lofty plane of darkness, but they failed to reach like the outer reaches of it, and so it became a failed rite. So it seems like even though they did successfully enter the nightmare, it wasn't enough for their ambition, and they may have tried to ascend once again. And part of the reason why I think that is when we get to the room right before Murgo's wet nurse, we will find a bunch of figures in Mensis cages, in chairs, kind of mummified remains, exactly like we find in the Advent Plaza. So that idea might be like repeated here. So let me try to like look up the cut minister dialogue. Okay, so he says, "Oh, I, but I've nothing more to tell. I only show the way, and the way has been shown. Now it's in your hands until the dank, sweet mud takes us all upon the awakening of Ebrietis." So like the moon presence. So the idea of a grand lake of mud is related to ROM for sure in the final version of the game, and the moon presence in cut content. And then we get more crying from the baby Murgo, showing that we're getting... So Garen the First, welcome back. Nice to see you again. Glad you can join the stream. We just defeated Mikolash and are progressing through the Nightmare of Mensis. And what had been a very, very strong, well, not so much when I fought them, boss encounter early in the game gets repeated in the form of a regular enemy, like the Shadows of Yharnam. I think I didn't talk about it when we fought the version in the Forbidden Woods, but they were infected by the snake parasites, and they seem to have gained like a lot of like powers from those snakes. They were able to summon them like from the nightmare, whereas these versions do not have snakes. They do not like have them burst out of their chests. They cannot summon them, and so they're just kind of a normal enemy. And it could just be like, you know, the hunter became stronger as we progressed and they aren't that big of a deal anymore. Or it could just mean like, I don't know, the snakes are what powered up the originals that we found in the Forbidden Woods and the Forbidden Grave. Oh, failed visceral. Brilliant. So these pigs have a ton of eyes on the front of their faces. Instead of poison breath, oh, I'm probably gonna die. Yeah, they have frenzy breath, and that's what I get for not healing up and trying to show that off, or use the sedatives. And so I think there is going to be a thematic relevance to the idea of frenzy, arcane, and getting eyes. I've talked about it a lot in different contexts, and even together in a lot of ways, like the arcane attacks of the church servants with the lanterns. Those lanterns will gain eyes and they will be able to perform those arcane attacks. And these pigs here gain eyes and they have frenzy breath, which is related to the arcane according to the sedative description. So I think it's very possible that like Mikolash's idea of coming into contact with great ones and then being able to grant eyes might be part of the reason why the pigs in this area have the extra eyes, and why like all of the eyes are covering the walls down below. They could have just been like actual regular spiders until they came into contact with something arcane, which transformed them into an eye, like perhaps on like the spider's brain, and just grew up so violently that that's all it was in the end. And it could relate to like that idea with the research halls, like bloated head patients as well, and their attempts to gain eyes on the inside by coming into contact with like water and cattle runes, with like the milkweed rune and things like that, and phantasms. So yes, they do shadow Queen Yharnam. The shadows of Yharnam is clever, because Yharnam refers to Queen Yharnam, not the city. They shadow Queen Yharnam, yes. So that is something that we do need to figure out as we play the game, and the Japanese also has that same kind of not continuity, but ambiguousness in terms of the name. Like it could mean like a literal shadow, or it could mean, wow, this is the second time. Could probably just be the steps. So I do really like that when like these pigs take your echoes, like all of the eyes will glow. And then when we kill them, we get our echoes back, of course. But just the idea of like they have frenzy breath instead of poison breath now. things like that. This is probably like one of the best farm areas in the game. You can use these pigs to kill like a bunch of the shadows of Yharnam that are lurking up over here if you don't get run over. They will gain aggro on each other. Oh wow. So it is pretty different that there are some kind of enemies that are hostile towards other enemies. Because we see with like Scourge Beasts and Beast Patients, they don't attack other beasts. But the Shadows of Yharnam will attack the pigs or vice versa. And I think that is supposed to just lend support to the idea that the Shadows of Yharnam are indeed the bodyguards of Queen Yharnam. They are protecting the Queen herself from those pigs. And we will examine her after I pick up these items, and then I'll backtrack and go through the rest of the area. So we've already got 58,000 echoes, and I haven't even like equipped any of the moon runes or the air runes to really increase our echo absorption rate. Just shows that this is like one of the best farming spots in the game. So this is the lady we did see in the Moonside Lake, potentially that Grand Lake of Mud that Mikolash had pointed out. We see her abdomen is covered with a dark, like, clotted blood, as though she had a miscarriage. When we find her in the Chalice Dungeon herself, she will still have, like, the blood coming out of it, but her abdomen will be full, as though she's carrying the Yharnam Stone. And that is also relevant to her boss fight, because the true version of her will have the enlarged belly, whereas her clones or astral projections will not. So that's one way to track the true Queen Yharnam from the fake one. If we look at her face, I think it tends to resemble that of the messengers. It's very gaunt, extremely pale and white and black, so it kind of resembles that of being an undead person. She herself might be undead at this point, being like the Thumerian Queen. She probably died already, even though her neck is covered. Her hands are shackled by this like kind of box-like handcuffing thing, and most notably, in my opinion, is on her left ring finger she has the ring of betrothal, most likely indicating that she was wedded to a great one according to like Thumerian traditions, possibly Erden, and that may have been why the Blood Queen was able to bear a child of blood in those arms, as is brought up in certain notes throughout the game. So, going back to the chat. The Good Hunter in Bringing Home the Bacon. Garmin asks, why the trophy that you get after defeating shadows is Shadow of Yharnam instead of Shadows of Yharnam? That's a pretty good question. A lot of times in Japanese, the singular form of a word is not distinct from the plural version of it. Like, they do have a suffix to clarify it, but it doesn't get used in a lot of situations. So it's hard to tell if they're talking about one thing or multiple. And so that could have been at play with like the Witch of Hemwick. It could be just Witch of Hemwick, and so there could be multiple witches of Hemwick. If you just see the one name at a time, like saying the Witch of Hemwick does mean it's only one, versus witch could just be like there's one witch, there's two witch, there's three witches, etc. And now that we're at Murgo's Loft, its cries are much stronger and much clearer than if we're in the different areas of the game. And I do take the fact that you can hear Murgo's cries in the different areas of the game to be representative of it being a special kind of infant, which Miyazaki does reinforce as well. Because you cannot hear like a normal baby crying from like beyond the dead in real life unless you like believe in ghosts and things like that. Which, I mean, I won't really go into that kind of like real life headcanon, but just it is something notable that no matter where you go, you can hear the infant crying. So we get some more chunks, and when we look out into the distance, this is the nightmare. The red moon, bafflingly and kind of infuriatingly, does not appear in the Nightmare of Mensis. Maybe it's supposed to just show that the moon presence is stuck over Yarnum, not in the nightmares. But it's quite annoying because if Murgo's cries are supposed to be beckoning the red moon and the moon presence, that it does not appear close to Murgo where we would find it in the like later version of the game or like later area of the game. So we have a very, very bright white moon. Oh, the madness. And it does kind of clip over the mountains and the clouds in the background, which should show like whatever is going on in this nightmare. Like it's not what you would expect to find if it were something representative of reality, which should be a little bit obvious, but clouds do not hide behind the moon. The moon hides behind the clouds in real life, so whatever that moon is made out of, like it's in the middle of the dream. It's not normal by any means. So get some more bloodstone chunks. Some more gems. Oh, I haven't switched up my gems in a while. That'll probably make a big difference in damage. So I think I'll go to the Hunter's Dream and level up in case I die to the Winter Lanterns, and then we'll deal with the Brain of Mensis and all of the fun lore that will bring about. Murgo's Wet Nurse and the Cries of the Baby are straight up ahead. I have mentioned that when we go up this route, we will see a bunch of the skeletons that resemble what we can find in the Advent Plaza. They're all in chairs with the cages over the head, so maybe they tried to ascend once more. Perhaps the audience with the baby Murgo caused them to become mummified in the way that they are, and they may have become amalgamated into the Brain of Mensis, although that has a very contentious reading in Japanese and English, so maybe that didn't really happen. And of course, I didn't mention it before, but she's kind of crying and like looking up towards where the baby would be. And her cries kind of almost sound like a laugh, to be quite honest. Not terribly convincing cries in my opinion, but one of the most confusing items in the game is in this box. We get another blood vial related to Yosefka, and we can't pick it up because we've already got one in our inventory. So people like to question whether or not the true Yosefka or the fake Yosefka had connections to the School of Mensis, since we can find her blood vial in that box right there. I don't really think we can make claims whether or not she was part of Mensis and like she came into an argument with the fake Yosefka who is part of the choir or anything like that. Just kind of, it's probably like a developer hint to try to go back to the clinic and meet the fake Yosefka to get her umbilical cord. That's like the best explanation we can kind of come up with for now, I think, in terms of like why on earth like that item is where it is. So.
Welcome. What is it? Very well. Let me.
So 2 levels, and that's just so easy. Probably go with some vitality for now, honestly. I've been dying so quickly. I'll re-equip the runes just to be a little more frenzy resistance rather than stamina. Where are they? Okay. So I guess resistance of all types. Oh. Okay, so that'll increase frenzy resistance as well. That's what we're gonna do. Since our insight is pretty high. Oh, okay, so this does show off like the frenzy meter. It's not related to the insight, so it's not terribly important, but I suppose it's something I can talk about. So, in Bloodborne, insight is related to frenzy and beasthood. The more insight one has, the more frenzy resistance gets reduced, and beasthood resistance gets increased. So that does show a kind of dichotomy between the two ideas, although I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy because there is a relationship between like beasthood and the arcane regardless. And I don't know, like it doesn't mean like if you have enough insight you're completely immune to beasthood either, but there is like a bunch of like diminishing returns is what I would say about that. And so I might not have explained that like super well right now. I apologize, I'm a little bit distracted with like running around. Not that that's an excuse. Of course I remember now that I forgot to equip the gems. And I was at full health. This area we could have visited while we were fighting Mikolash, although it's a little bit dangerous just because of the attendants at the bottom. And I believe we get a moon rune at the end of it, our second tier. That was earlier on than I was expecting? Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So I'll try to kite the big one away. So it says, if you kill the wet nurse before doing the DLC, you don't get the dialogue for Garyman and how he's been sleeping more soundly because of the Hunter's Nightmare being destroyed. Yeah, and so I was not going to do the wet nurse quite yet. I was just gonna like get up to there and then go back to the other areas. So I do thank you for bringing that up. I am aware. So yes, we do get the second tier of the moon rune, and since like the School of Mensis is focused on the moon, and beckoning the moon, like I think it makes sense that we would get another tier of the moon rune here, because in Latin the word mensis is does mean moon, and of course like a lot of people think mensis is related to menstruation, but that's because like the concept of menstruation is linked to the moon as well, and in months and lunar cycles, so it all does tie together in there. And so the reason why we're coming back over here is since we got that iron gate key, it opens the door towards like the brain of Mensis. And I don't really want to go out yet. I think we can open it from the other side, but I'm just showing like it's a door immediately to the left of Mikolash's arena. So you can open it, and they're down yet, so I'm just going to go back around the front way. Oh, I don't think I unlocked the staircase from the top of the map. I don't think I ever stepped into it. Oh, that's dumb of me. So I might just use a Bold Hunter's Mark. Because I don't think it was this one that we used to access the area. Yeah, because we're lower and we need to be higher. Okay. So go to the inventory. Yeah, and menstruation and blood are obviously connected as well. So a lot of people tend to think that like maybe it's period blood we're drinking, which I apologize for giving you guys that imagery, but something people think, so I'm just kind of including that. And we can hear the chiming of winter lanterns from this area as well. If we look down to the bridge, we can already see them walking around. They're creepy, shuffling. So we can use this elevator, and hopefully I don't fall through. Oh, God. To access like the little bridge from above. It's a little bit of a hidden path because like the door on that cage is broken. I don't think I need to repeat what Soda just said. Herbito's mocking the winter lanterns. That was a lemonade to your joke. You're sorry. You should be. Oh, I totally thought this would have been at the bottom, and I'd have to pull the lever. So I think I need to roll. It's just one of the more annoying. Oh no! I did that way too late. I usually come in from the bottom as well. I know that's just more of an excuse. So yeah, timing that is a little bit tedious. Round 3. Damn it. That time was too early. The elevator boss. True final boss of the game. I don't know if any of you guys ever played like a World of Warcraft, but there was a really hilarious elevator in Antorus, like the final raid of Legion content, and one thing that I like to do is just like spawn a little toy treasure chest at the base of the elevator, because if it came down and a player was like standing underneath it, they would get crushed and die immediately. It's just like one little trolley thing that I like to do back then. There we go. 4th time's the charm, jeez. And now I just need to die to a winter lantern immediately to just like complete the cycle, I suppose. Hey Wenders, it's nice to see you again. Welcome back. We killed Mikalash, died to the elevator a bunch of times, and are going to deal with the brain of Mensis. We killed the Celestial Emissary. I died to Brieta, so I just decided to move on. So, okay, yeah, it is true. Like, in this area, the Winter Lanterns will continue to hit the player with the Frenzy Spears. And I think Lance has said, like, the assets for the Frenzy Spears aren't loaded into the other areas, so that's why we don't see them there. So you can parry the Winter Lantern's grab attack and ice frame through their frenzy damage. I have shown that off before. And then we get a ton of the like little skeletal rock formations in this area, which I think might be related to like the brain of Mensis or probably the people of Yahar'gul. And then we get 2 more lanterns over here. So adding those frenzy resist runes really did help out a lot. interesting that they drop bullets. The lanterns could be related to Mercury, maybe. Like, you have the iframes protect. Yeah. So I don't know if, what was I gonna say? They're necessarily like so related to Mercury. I just think like there's probably a stronger connection between Mercury and like the nightmares and the arcane and things like that that I've mentioned before. So they also do drop really good cursed gems, and if we look at the ground here, we also do see like skeletons as well. So I do wonder how it all like kind of matches up. If you guys weren't sick of spiders before, well, we've got a fun little room filled with spiders again, except this time these guys have humanoid heads with the very, very fashionable bowl cut. So Patches is bald and these guys have hair. It's pretty much the only difference between them. I will try to show off some of their more interesting attacks. Let me clear out a couple of them, because these are pretty different compared to some of the other spiders. Alright, this should be good. Just want to double check to see I'm not going to get ambushed. It might take a minute for this guy to do the attack, but I think it's pretty worth showing off. I do like that their necklaces, maybe they're not bells. Okay, yeah, they are just necklaces. For a second I thought they were bells, but they're pretty much the same necklace that Patches has. These guys fail to talk, unlike Patches, and just seem to be more like spider-like in their demeanor. I was gonna try to kick it like I was in Dark Souls, but I remember that's not in Bloodborne. Come on. Nope. Oh, here we go. So they have that really interesting like little cloud-like attack that they do. It's like a spell arcane type attack, which just kind of like looks like a bunch of that like nightmare mist that I talk about a decent amount. So Mercury is usually associated with the moon and alchemy, so have fun with that knowledge. That's a good point and fun to bring up, especially like in relation to Bloodborne and whether or not like the moon presence is really the source of everything, which I don't necessarily believe, but like there's certainly a connection between the cosmos and celestial bodies like the moon in relation to alchemy and Mercury and things like that. To which a Hemic is an AoE attack like that, right? Yeah, I think the Bell Maidens do too. Like not quite the same, but just like a kind of AoE that they use. Alright, so when we pull this lever, we will get a cutscene that shows like the chains releasing the brain that's been held up down there. And if we look like from this angle, we can see like giant eyes and like really creepy textures already. If we do try to kill it from its positioning in there, like it has infinite health. There are some dudes on YouTube who spent like an hour using their emergency bullets and like choir bells to heal up and try to kill it, and it just didn't work out. It has infinite health, unfortunately. So we drop that evil brain down into a pitch black pit. And when we drop down, we immediately grab the attention of a winter lantern, which hopefully she will lose aggro. And then there's a couple of spiders chilling over there, and those are the headless variants. So I think I should have enough frenzy resist where this shouldn't be too much of an issue. Come on. Really? Oh god. I'm probably gonna die, yeah. Well, the brain is dropped, so that shouldn't be too bad to deal with now. I don't know why that visceral didn't go off. Maybe I just slightly too early. So at least now I don't have to deal with the elevator or like the drop off. You can just use that iron gate key to get to that section of the bridge. So I think I did forget to point this out. I think that over there is supposed to be the Nightmare Frontier. Like that might be Amygdala's chamber right there, and like those are the big graves from the start of the area. And when we look back from the Nightmare Frontier up here, like we can see this church. So I think that's where that place lies in relation to this nightmare. So that's the 2 layers of the bridge right there. Try not to run and fall to my death now that that platform's not there. And so the continue to spawn, which is a bit weird. I think they'd be related to Micklash. Where is it? Okay, here we go. And so my whole idea about like Frenzy being tied to the Insight, I think it's more or less proven here from the amount of Madman's knowledges and Great One wisdoms we get from these guys that are riddled with the Frenzy Spears. This guy does drop the Blood Gem, and that's like one of the only different kind of drops. But it is like one of the higher tier levels of gems to begin with. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of the Great One's wisdoms just from this little bridge alone. It's the most densely concentrated amount of insight that we can find in the game in one spot for sure. And because it's the higher tier of the insight consumables, as opposed to just like the Madman's knowledges, I think it should be understood as being pretty explicit at this point. Okay, that time I was late. I totally shot it though. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. No, I'm gonna live. Okay. Okay, I shot it again. Is this one just visceral immune? Bad. Okay, now I'm gonna die. Did my timing look off to you guys, or? I think you should be able to visceral it, so I'm just gonna take it as like me screwing up, but considering how consistently I've gotten all the other ones, I'm just a little bit baffled right now. It's just the blunderbuss is slow. I don't know, like... Reminder to self to just send the elevator back up if I'm going to continue to play this badly. Or maybe not, because if I can... Yeah, I should, now that I think about it. I do like how there are like a bunch of notes or like papers scattered about and like books lying around on the ground. So like the school had been doing research here. So it is interesting to think like if they were doing research, if these books were written by Thumerians or if they were written by the school of Mensis themselves as they were researching the nightmare. Oh, I never did read that Iron Key, now that I think about it. Or the Mensis Cage. Okay, yeah. So the Iron Door Key is, of the three great bridges that link the two cathedral cradles, this key opens the front door, the iron door that leads to the mid-level bridge. There are no thieves in the nightmare, then why lock a door? Be warned, there must be a very, very good reason. So there is a small bit of a difference between those descriptions. Let me double check. So it says, like, in the world of nightmares, there should be no thieves. As such, there must be a reason to close the door. It may be better to not come closer. So it's just like trying to get at the idea, like, hey, there's a reason this must have been closed. So really think about what you're doing over there. Come on. There we go. I had no idea why I had so many issues before. All zero. Oh, I guess I did have echo still? What? Oh, I don't know. So from here we gain the choir bell, which I take to show like, hey, if the Mensis is like using the choir-based weapons and it doesn't seem to be like something done by force, like maybe they were still working together. I just don't really buy the whole like warfare factional disputes that I've heard others bring up. But I mean, if you want to believe it, you're more than welcome to. I just want a little bit more evidence to believe it myself. Alright, so now that this area is finally cleared out, we can drop down to where the brain had been and pick up like the blood rock, the best upgrading material in the game. So this is where the brain was. And we can see this entire area is covered with eyes, and they do have like more like dilated pupils compared to like what we found over by the spiders or things like that. And so I just think it's related to them like coming into contact with the arcane, and that may be related to why they formed. If we do try to go down this pit, we will die. It's not quite endless, but for like this part of the map, it essentially is. Oh, that guy just spawned out of nowhere. And I have not forgotten about the Cage of Mensis quite yet. I'm just trying to get a little bit progressed with where we are before we look at that. Oh, and I did forget to show off with the Cosmic Eye Watcher badge unlocked for us in the messenger shop. So this cage wasn't available before. We can enter it now to go down this deep, deep, dark, dark pit, which we dropped the brain into. So I don't necessarily know if I should like make this comparison, but this is kind of like reminiscent of the Abyss in like Dark Souls, and you can't really see anything that's going on. But as you progress further, is it not here? Did it like... It should totally be here. Alright, so I'm just gonna use some shining coins to see if I'm like at a wall or something. Oh, that's totally not it. Did my game glitch, guys? Like, I absolutely know that you should be able to see like the brain as soon as you come down here. Okay, so yeah, that's the wall. What the hell? Is it because I died? Oh, okay. So I was just facing the wrong way? Okay. I was so worried for a moment. So this is our very, very pleasant brain of Mensis. And if we examine it very, very closely, we can see it has a gigantic arm with very claw-like fingers. What looks to be almost like a stigmata coming out of the center of its hand. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fingers, which resemble that of an amygdala's hand. And when we go closer, it looks like it has a bunch of like skeletal figures coming out of it. Furs coming out of it as well, as though it related to beasthood or blood, and it's covered in gigantic eyes. So, before we do deal with this, I'm going to look at that Mensis cage. So this is the Mensis cage. It is the School of Mensis. The School of Mensis controls the unseen village. This hexagonal iron cage suggests their strange ways. Okay, yeah, it's just weirdly written. This hexagonal iron cage suggests their strange ways. The cage is a device that restrains the will of the self, allowing one to see the profane world for what it is. It also serves as an antenna that facilitates contact with the Great Ones of the dream. But to an observer, the iron cage appears to be precisely what delivered them to their harrowing nightmare. And as you may imagine, I do have a bit to say about that. That scared the shit out of you? The brain? Yeah, I do have a bit to say about the cage of Mensis, or the Mensis cage. So, the idea of using the cage to suppress their wills is more like you would almost think that that kind of idea of the will of the self is related to the willpower of blood echoes, but that doesn't show up in the Japanese. It just uses like the form of will for like volition or ambition or like willpower. It doesn't use the same kanji for like the dying wills of the blood echoes. However, that could have just been a bit of an oversight by the developers. I'm not entirely sure. I'll just take it as it is. It's just regular will. And the idea is by like caging themselves up, they um, become more objective and can view the physical world for what it is, and that is a way for them to like use it as a kind of antenna to come into contact with the Great Ones. And it doesn't say like the Great Ones of nightmares in Japanese. It does also say the Great Ones of the dream, which is an interesting concept because like a lot of the Great Ones are connected to nightmares, especially like with the Moon Rune, which will become relevant in just a moment. And so the final line is, and so this truly guided them into a sought after nightmare. And that's pretty close, but just rather than just saying like harrowing, it's something that they themselves wanted. So that's a little bit of a pretty big flavor difference between the two descriptions. Linder says he remembers the theory saying that the Mensis cage looks like a tower, reminiscent of the Tower of Babel and desire to get closer to the gods. Possibly. I think, as Rubito had mentioned in one of the previous streams, like the lattice framework could be similar to what we will get in like the tonsil stone. Where is that? So I think like there may be a connection between the tonsil stone, the Mensis cage, and maybe like the projectiles that Rom fires in her fight, stuff like that. And so now that we have looked at the Mensis brain and the Mensis cage, let's just look at it a little bit more before finishing that up. Its other hand is pretty misshapen. It also has 6 fingers. This one does resemble more of a pinky rather than like dual-sided thumbs. And like their back is like connected to kind of nothing, like these like almost brain stem like things that come out of it. These tendrils do kind of remind me of what we see. It looks like it has like these cyst-like structures coming out of it, teratoma, like tumors of some sort. And I do like that the brain can kind of track you with its eyes. It looks really pathetic down here in the dark, especially you don't have the lantern on. It just kind of follows you with its googly eyes. And so one of the craziest parts of the game can be done right now. Rather than using that, let's switch it out with the make contact gesture, which we obtained from the Upper Cathedral Ward. And we wait approximately 1 minute for the gesture to transition and for us to make contact with a Great One. Riveting gameplay, I know. So after a minute, we change directions with our arms to uh, show potentially to the Great One that we do have like some concept of knowledge. It is our way to make contact with this Great One, and from this Great One we gain the Moon Rune. And I like to think that since the Carol runes are the transcriptions of the inhuman voices of the Great Ones, that this is also coming from the brain of Mensis, and that we should think of this as the brain speaking to us and it just saying moon. And of course, like it's extremely difficult to understand like what this means. There's no concrete answers as to what this means. I have found a very interesting parallel to a story in Buddhism relating to Hotei and pointing to the moon, and I'm gonna like paste in a link to one of the stories that I found, which I think could be relating to this gesture that we've just gotten, and it's in the chat now. I will try to give a quick recap of it, but just the general idea is in Buddhism there is a kind of a phrase where it's like don't mistake the finger that points to the moon as like the way. And the way in this example would be like as the path of Buddha, or like the way to attain Buddhahood. And of course, like Buddhahood is synonymous with enlightenment in Buddhism, and Buddha does mean like illumination or enlightenment to a certain degree. So the idea that we would use this gesture to kind of like point above us and a little bit off to the side might be related to that little painting within that link of Hotei pointing to the moon. I think it's of course a very arguable and probably unlikely connection, but just the idea that by pointing up towards the moon, it could be indicative of either the path to enlightenment, or that we ourselves are enlightened, or the Mentis brain may be saying to us that going and pursuing the path to the moon is how we would later reach enlightenment for ourselves. So this is a very deep lore take that I don't think anybody else has brought up. Um, it's very head canon and tinfoil heavy, I admit, but I think there are a lot of parallels between that story. And one of the other aspects of the story, which I find fascinating, is uh, potentially related to Ram as well. Like there's a another painting of a monkey trying to grasp the moon in a pool of water or like a lake below it. And so the idea is like you mistake the way and the truth of the world for like what's reflected by the world. And so by reaching your hand into the water of the lake, you might think you're going for the moon because you can see the moon in it, and you don't necessarily realize that like the true thing is beyond what's immediately in front of you. And so the idea of like hanging on to the truth and pursuing it is very important. And what may be shown to you could be a kind of false representation of reality. So other people do think that like the gesture that we show could be like related to mathematics, and that it would show that we're kind of an intelligent enough being that the Great One can talk to us. Um, or it could also potentially be a cycle of the moon and the sun. I'm not sure like how well that fleshes out with the full story of the game. I'm not even so sure how well my idea fleshes out with the full story of the game, but I think that's probably the closest reading that I can give to it when we tie in like the ideas of like insight and the moon and enlightenment and all that stuff together. So, hope you guys enjoyed that. And so does headcanon. It gives you the moon as a thank you for acknowledging its ascendance. Uh, I don't think it's ascended, despite like the whole contentious issues there are around ascension in general. I will look at this moon rune again just to kind of like, I don't know, kind of complete the cycle. We found 2 tiers of the moon rune, and the brain of Mensis might be related to the school of Mensis, and we'll get into that in a second. And it tells us of the moon, so the moon is a really big deal to whatever is going on in this part of the nightmare. So the transcription of moon is spoken by the great ones inhabiting the nightmare, and of course, I have mentioned before that it could just be a singular great one, or it could be multiple. It's unclear in Japanese. And from the moon rune, we gain more blood echoes from the enemies, which to me could suggest like there might be a kind of like tidal effect between the moon presence. If using the moon rune, if it's supposed to be connected to the moon presence, it could just show that it's in the nature of the moon presence to like siphon echoes from things if this moon rune is supposed to be related to it. The great ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon. They often answer to the voices of those who call out, is what it says in Japanese. So the idea of voices being relevant to the great ones is important when we consider that we can hear the crying voice of Murgo beckoning everything that's going on in this nightmare right now. The brain of Mensis could also be literal. If Mensis is the moon, it could be the brain of the moon or the brain of the moon affiliated Great One. I would disagree with that, and I'm about to get into that right now. So now that we've gotten our share of loot from this Great One, which we've defeated by pulling a lever, we're going to callously just attack the hell out of it, make it bleed, enjoy the imagery of stabbing a sword in, or like a toothpick into your eye, I suppose. And oh, my HUD is off, so we don't get like our health bar. This thing can take a ton of hits, like just as much as any boss in the game, if not more. And it just really kind of like I think really dials into the idea of like hunters being merciless or things of that nature. So you really get like a lot of time to reflect on the terrible actions you're performing right now. Probably should have done this from the start. So it gives a ghastly scream and explodes in a rain of blood, which is kind of nothing new to the game. Oh, I might as well try to show... Oh, no. I was going to show off the sedatives working on the Beasthood meter, but I forgot. And so the living string description has one of the most ambiguous descriptions in Japanese, and it can read completely differently to what we find in English. And I've been building this up for a very long time. So the living string is a special material used in a holy chalice ritual. The immense brain that Mensis retrieved from the nightmare was indeed lined with eyes on the inside, but they were of an evil sort, and the brain itself was terribly rotten. But even still, it was a legitimate great one, and left a relic, a living relic at that, which is a precious thing indeed. That scream. Poor thing. So, the idea that the School of Mensis retrieved the brain from the nightmare only leads into one possible interpretation in English, and that like the brain must have already existed and been in this area before the school arrived. However, in the Japanese description for that, the word for a retrieve is eru, or like eta, like the past form of gain or gained, like the idea of like you gain a level as you gain experience or things like that. It can also mean receive or get, something like that. So if they got the brain from like the nightmare, I can understand how they thought it could be retrieved, but I think like the the immense brains that they received in the nightmare is supposed to be connected to what goes on with the audience with Murgo. I do not have that umbilical cord yet, but there is a kind of cut line in this description itself. It says in Japanese that the gigantic brains Mensis gained in the nightmare was certainly lined with eyes on the inside, and the next part is cut, but they were completely malformed. And the word that they use for malformed is the same term that the English uses, like the audience with Murgo stillbirthed the brain. So uh, stillbirth is a bit of like a localization flair to kind of like tie into the imagery of children and infants and like babies and things dying before they're fully born. The Japanese is deki sokonai, which means like not fully formed or it's useless. It's deformed. It's malfunctioned. It's kind of like a bastard. So like I think it's a brilliant kind of a term that they used. The real shame is that that part of the brain of or the living string description was cut. So the eyes that it was lined with on the inside were completely malformed. They were of an evil kind and made the brain itself become corrupted or rotted, is what the Japanese says. So it's saying like, to me, it sounds like the School of Mensis may have had audience with Murgo. From that audience, they had their brains become lined with eyes on the inside, but the eyes themselves weren't proper eyes on the inside. They were malformed, and because they were evil eyes, they caused their brains to rot and become corrupted, and they became gigantic as a result of what the eyes were doing. And I think that does tie into how when the brain is looking at us from a distance, it will inflict frenzy upon us and all that kind of thing. That might also tie into the Winter Lanterns in that they're also formed out of like the little messenger-esque skeletal figures, and they also inflict frenzy upon sight. It's definitely unclear why they would be different from the brain of Mensis, and I don't have a very good explanation for that, but I just really do like to highlight this possibility that is not present in English but is present in Japanese, that the brain itself, the brain of Mensis, could have been made from the school of Mensis. And just I also should note that the brain of Mensis is kind of more like a fan name, or it might just be a guidebook name. It doesn't necessarily like the brain itself is for all intents and purposes like nameless in the game itself. So let's go back to the chat. It has 9,387 HP. For comparison, the one reborn has 10,000. So yeah, it's pretty beefy. Speaking of which, I remember a theory saying that the brain of Mensis is made of the scholar's eyes and the one reborn is the industrial waste. I think there could be a possibility that since the brain of Mensis reuses assets from an amygdala, excuse me, and that the one reborn in the internal files is called like the malformed or like the Deki Sokonai Jashin or like the malformed amygdala. I do think that there was a good possibility of the brain of Mensis and the one reborn being connected to some degree. I don't know if that connection is still there in the final version of the game. It could just be like if the brain of Mensis is made out of the Mensis scholars, perhaps the one reborn is made out of like the human sacrifices in Yahar'gul. My personal thoughts are like the sacrifices, the petrified people in Yahar'gul, they might be like the little skeletal rock formations that we can find in this area in the Nightmare of Mensis. So Soda thinks something similar. If the word retrieved proves to be inaccurate, the one reborn could be failed experiments. Yeah, I think it might be tied to like how we have all those people in the chairs in front of Murgo's loft. I can say about the brain of Mensis, I think uh, of course everything that I've said is just conjecture. It might be in Japanese that like the idea was that the brain was already there. I think we gain more from the reading that like if Murgo could give eyes through through the power of its voice, because if it is like a kind of great one and coming into an audience with the great ones can bring about eyes on the inside, like Mikolash says in relation to Kos or Cosm. I think that's I don't think that's preposterous. And so like with all the eyes on the things on like the walls in this area, the potential reason why like the pigs have the extra eyes, um, I think it's possible that like that could happen. I know it doesn't like sound very fulfilling for like a lot of people, but there's also the idea that like if the fake Yosefka was starting to see things on the inside from her interaction with the Erden Wraith rune, like, I don't think it's completely unprecedented. So like they're just kind of covered in eyes, and they do give like that frenzy breath, and the brain of Mensis is covered in eyes, and it inflicts frenzy, and that's all related to the arcane, and that's why I've been harping about like how Eldritch Truth, Eldritch Power, Uncanny Power, things like that, they're all related to the arcane, and that's like the crux of what I've been talking about for like this entire playthrough. So, of course, that is my reading on it, and to a certain degree, like we can't really say what's more correct than other people, but to me that's like the best kind of description I can give for this kind of world as we've come into contact with it. So let me know if you guys think that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or if I'm not crazy with this headcanon. Oh, got riggedy wrecked. Okay. So this has been about 3 hours. We did do most of what I wanted to do. We didn't kill Briadas, and I did want to kind of kill the Bloody Crow Canehurst for this run, but it's fine if we hold that off for later. I might just level up off stream, just because it's a lore playthrough, and like I could try hard it, but I think that's just a bit time consuming and not like super good content for the whole theme of this run. So I think that's about it for now. I do want to thank everybody that showed up as normal, who supported the stream and like watched the VODs and lurked and talked. If you guys have any more questions and like want to talk to me off the stream, I've got the Discord server available in the description. So yeah, that'll pretty much conclude things for today, I think. So just leave on thoughts of Yarnum and her potential connections to Murgo as we go into the next episode. Even though we'll probably most likely begin the DLC and deal with all of that. So, all right, everyone. Thank you and have a good day.